This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Bekritzes. In our season finale, we're bringing you an absolutely insight-packed conversation about the current and future state of the natural foods industry.
As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures.
If you look at the consumer, they really are adopting a more proactive approach to health. What consumers are really looking at is they're focusing more on prevention rather than treatment.
For our final episode of the season, we're excited to bring you a panel discussion from a webinar put on by Naturally Chicago, an organization doing amazing work to bring together the natural products sector through events, resources, and industry insights. The discussion was a very data-driven analysis of the natural products industry, which, as panelists pointed out, is seeing growth across metrics. The sector is expected to hit almost $320 billion this year and to grow at a rate of 5% annually over the next few years. There has also been continued dollar and unit growth in natural foods month over month. The panel explored some of the most exciting growth areas in the sector and how CPG companies and retailers can capitalize on this momentum. The panel was moderated by Hannah Law, SVP of Corporate Strategy and Communications and Chief of Staff at SPINS, a company that helps brands, retailers, and their partners understand product data and shopper values to improve product innovation. On the panel were Catherine Peters, Head of Industry Relations also at SPINS, and Mark Nearing, Director of Growth Solutions at KeHE Distributors, a national food distributor focused on organic, natural, fresh, and specialty products. I also spoke with Chuck Templeton about some of his reflections on the natural food space and where he sees these trends going. Now on to the panel, where the conversation focused on three major and interconnected themes for 2025.
What we've done together with KeHE is we've put together our best thinking on 2025 and sort of bucketed into three big ideas. These ideas are not mutually exclusive. They are themes, they are trends, but they're very much sort of interconnected. And I like to think of them as a bit of a skeleton key for what's going to unlock power and potential and growth and opportunity for brands going into 2025.
The three trends were preferences with staying power, the art and science of being ready, and media of the moment. The conversation kicked off on the theme of preferences with staying power.
Catherine, I want to turn to you and say, look, we have seen some language around values, value-based customers, people shopping with their wallets. How do you think about the difference between just a preference and a value and something that maybe tags into that resilience that you were talking about before?
There's these informed choices that are just so overwhelming in today's marketplace that supports the preferences that consumers want to be in control. They want to have the power to make their own decisions, and they want to have the right kind of information to make the choices that's right for them. So we'll see that as consumers continue to really learn and evolve, that these preferences will have trends that go in and out, but you'll still see them generally falling under some of these umbrellas that we're going to cover today. And they really have a lot of staying power.
One of the first things that we had talked about as a group in preparing both for this webinar and in some of the materials that we've been publishing is this idea of aging well. And Mark KeHE brought this up very eloquently in your macro trends report. And I wonder if we could start with you. Talk a little bit about what does aging mean in the context of the values and behaviors that consumers are bringing to their choices.
This is a huge trend. It seems like it's everywhere you go, you see more and more content and commentary on how do we age well. So we've termed this the new rules of aging well. And I would say if you look at the consumer, they really are adopting a more proactive approach to health, what consumers are really looking at is they're focusing more on prevention rather than treatment. And as you can see the statistic on the screen here, 91% of consumers agree that healthcare should focus more on preventative care. And so I think it's just a huge paradigm shift. It's been happening for some time, but as consumers are more informed than they've ever been about food and beverage, more informed about supplements, they're digging deeper. They're going deep into ingredient panels. They're looking for functional type of ingredients, and they're trying to support various wellness goals in their life. And I think most importantly, they're recognizing that in order to maintain good health, it's going to largely come from lifestyle choices as it relates to food. So the question, as you asked, how is this going to play out in 2025? I would say a continued focus on gut health. We're seeing a lot of growth in high protein and especially high quality protein, both animal-based and plant-based. And then seeing more functional benefits in everyday foods, including snacks and beverages. And I think supplementation also is going to be a large part of this going forward. The consumer is thinking about not just their physical health, but their emotional health, their mental health, mood support, stress management, all of these things that we deal with on a daily basis. The products that can support these overall wellness goals are going to be very important as we go forward.
It's important to also think about, if as you're a retailer or a brand, like how our individual sort of prescription for this aging well quality of life is our kind of part of our personal brand. But used to be that you heard most of your medical advice from your doctor or those kinds of things. But now there's practitioners everywhere. We're reading books, we're looking at podcasts, we're watching documentaries, we're using all these wearable devices, whether it's Whoops or Oura Rings or glucose monitors and cold plunges. And so it's really critical that we're also realizing that everyone on this webinar has a different specific formula. We want to be able to take all the information in, all these bits and pieces that we're looking for, more protein, lower sugars, whatever they may be, and we're then matching those in with our particular prescription or personalized brand for what we want for aging well. There is no one size fits all. There's so many different components, and we're constantly being informed in ways that's continuing to evolve how that larger preference moves along.
One of the trends from the Naturally Chicago webinar that really stood out to me was the aging trend. And the opportunity and challenge we face today as eaters, we have so many options to help us live our best and healthiest selves. So in this world of endless choices, how are you seeing companies rise above this chatter to differentiate themselves and make meaningful claims that hopefully they can back up and carve out a lasting space in the industry?
I do think that there's this aging well opportunity in which consumers now have much more information than they've ever had, having devices and things that they can now measure how they sleep after they eat, track what things they do. But it really is this opportunity now where people can be much more proactive in how preventative they are. And so thinking about if there's a certain history in my family, or if I'm tired in the afternoons or other things like that, consumers are digging into what food options do I have that are out there that might help me get past that and really think about how I'm going to age. And so there is this quantitative lifestyle that I'm measuring myself. I'm figuring out how I get better every day, and I'm going to live and not just a long life, but a healthy life too.
The conversation then moved onto the topic of how food can complement medical advice or prescriptions.
One of the more interesting dynamics, I think, for all of us today is, well, what happens when some of that influence comes from your doctor, comes from diagnostics, the rise of GLP-1 agonists as a treatment for more than just diabetes, but also obesity and other types of conditions are really changing the face of how people eat, their relationship with food. It is often sort of categorized under this idea of every bite counts. And so for us in the natural product industry, obviously we're staying up at night thinking about this. KP, Mark, how do you see this idea and this rise of GLP-1 agonists, that prescriptive, literally behavior from other sources, impact what brands and retailers need to be thinking about as they serve consumers?
I think this is a great question. I think it's a question that everyone is asking right now. So I can offer a few thoughts here. When you look at overall weight management studies, nearly 60% of Americans are either currently obese or overweight. And within that group, 82% of Americans are actively managing their weight to some degree. So of those who are actively managing their weight, 15% are turning to these GLP-1 medications to help kickstart a weight loss journey. And so that is just a staggering portion of the population. So I think from a brand perspective, what does that mean? Well, it means that people, as you said, were eating less calories per day. So each of those bites really counts. So that's either fewer calories per meal or fewer meals throughout the day. And there may also be some side effects from using these drugs. So the question for brands is what types of meal solutions, what types of snacks, and especially supplements will be needed to support someone who is using these medications. And so I think a lot of these trends intertwine between each other, but claims of higher protein is known to increase satiety. It slows digestion, it stabilizes blood sugar, and it helps to curb appetite. So protein is going to continue to be front and center for consumers. We're also seeing higher fiber being called out, and there's a lot of research right now that's investigating how certain types of fibers can help mimic the GLP-1 hormone response. So, of course, any natural food that can mimic those types of responses to compete against some of these drugs would, of course, be preferred. So I'm very interested to see what happens there. And then, of course, no sugar, low sugar, that's been trending for some time, but it definitely ties into this trend as well. And I think when you consider all of that, you're going to see a lot more GLP-1 friendly callouts on package. So ConAgra recently announced a new label that's specifically calling out GLP-1 friendly claims on certain healthy choice meals. And so I think brands are going to adopt this type of language and claims directly on packaging. And then finally, the last piece that I'll add is the supplementation. If you look at this consumer group, they will need additional vitamins, minerals, and very nutrient dense foods. So I'm thinking prebiotics, probiotics going to continue to grow, all of that can support overall gut health. And then finally, the last piece is from a retailer side, I would say just be prepared because this is a movement that's growing very quickly. So being able to cut those in very quickly for any product that shows promise.
I think you're right, Mark. I mean, this is a unique scenario where we have an external force with some of this development that's come in the GLP-1 medications, along with this already huge interest and movement towards aging well. And they're going to just keep creating more and more tailwinds going forward. And certainly we're already seeing microdosing and things like that, which is going to make it even more accessible for more consumers as a long-term approach. So without a doubt, you have multiple trends coming together that are going to really shape our industry as we go forward.
GLP-1 was obviously a huge deal this year. The panelists talked about this a bit and really dug into what brands should be accounting for to address this growing customer base and what types of meals or supplements would support someone on that type of medication. For example, ConAgra just came out with a label that supports GLP-1 friendly claims. What are you seeing as successful examples bridging medical and food industries where advice or prescriptions from your doctor might filter into your food choices? And maybe also, what do you see the impact of GLP-1 on the natural food industry going forward?
Yeah. There's estimates that it could be in the single mid digits to high single digits as far as the amount of the population that's on these. I think there's also going to be an evolution in this. This is just purely a guess, but whereas now GLP-1, you use a needle, I think there's going to be opportunities where we're going to see more and more oral applications for it, or the ability to be able to eat it in food. And maybe it won't be as impactful as Ozempic, but I think that it'll offer at the margin lots of opportunities to help satiate consumers. When you talk to anyone on GLP-1, oftentimes you'll hear the idea that I don't think about food in the afternoon, or I'm not sitting there pondering how hungry I am. I think there are going to be people who try to attempt to integrate these different types of GLP-1 products into foods that help satiate better, give you that feeling that you don't need to eat as much. And then on the flip side of that, the other thing that you hear from GLP-1, and they talked about this a little bit, was that people are being more choiceful with the calories that they are consuming. And so they're really looking at, how do I really be choiceful about, do I want this piece of fruit, or do I want this particular bar that's got less sugar or is maybe a smaller serving size? And I think you'll continue to see protein being added to a lot of applications. Maybe people figure out how to get more protein in pasta or more protein in beverages and in other things like that. I think there's going to be a group that continues to eat a lot of animal protein and asks for better versions of their animal protein without antibiotics and other adulterants or additives. And so I think all the retailers that we talk to and all the food manufacturers are thinking about it, and I think trying to plan ahead. And we'll see how fast it actually grows. But I do think that this is just going to be a big trend that I think people are going to have to watch for.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of external innovation and all of the different things that people can reach for in building a healthier diet and a healthier lifestyle. But I want to spend some time talking about product innovation and where we see new and exciting things coming up. I often like to think about innovation as both the art and the science of being ready for what consumers are going to ask for. Sometimes that is deeply data driven. Sometimes that is a little bit more sort of a gut feeling. And so I want to turn it to Catherine first to talk about how we at SPINS think about innovation and what that has looked like quantitatively. And then let's have a little bit of a discussion specifically about where we see innovation sort of being the most exciting right now.
Sure. I think it is really critical that brands and retailers stay in step with, today's really self-centric, values-oriented consumer. The pace of change is faster than ever. The product life cycle has been hastening over the last 10 to 15 years, and it's just going to continue to be that way. So it's pretty unforgiving. So that means brands have to stay a step ahead with their sustainable innovation in order to meet what consumers are looking for, to expand their loyal fan base, and to help retailers through category leadership and growth. Sometimes we like to jump straight into a product when you think about innovation, but you got to think about how you arm your entire organization for success. You make sure you've got transparency. Clearly communicate your company values and your goals, inclusive of those growth and innovation goals. How do you make sure you've got engaged employees? How do you have the right culture to attract and retain talent and keep them motivated and excited about reaching these growth goals? And then finally, have neutrality. In other words, create an environment where you don't have any kind of distraction or negativity. It means that you really bring a lot of unique and diverse opinions and thoughts to have great creation, but you use this neutrality by having your company values as a constant guiding principle that keeps everyone moving that forward and bringing difference of thought. That's what often brings breakthrough ideas.
Catherine pointed out some of the attributes that are important for innovation on a company level. When it comes to products, SPINS identified a list of top innovation categories for 2024. They were energy and sports drinks, refrigerated and plant-based milk, cold cereal, and wellness and snack bars.
We noticed a number of the top innovation categories that SPINS has identified in the Innovation Index are in the beverage space. And it was interesting to see how that connected, because at KeHE, we've identified another macro trend. So hitting the top 5, we've identified it as drink your health. And in this particular trend, it really is kind of a combination of two different trends. It's health focused, yes, but it's also combined with that aspect of convenience. And so 58% of consumers, they're looking for meal replacements, and 32% are looking to stay full between meals. And so we're really seeing a lot of growth in these functional beverages that can easily fit into a daily wellness routine. But beyond that, there's lots of other ways that consumers are using beverages beyond just a nutrition shake or a meal replacement drink. We're seeing a lot of growth in everyday hydration. That's a huge trend right now that we've seen this past year, and we'd expect to continue to grow. And so drinks that can offer those types of functional benefits. We're also seeing drinks that can improve any sort of digestion or gut health and make those claims on pack. As we look at this past year, if you think about the soda category, taking a drink that has traditionally just been very high in sugar with pretty much no nutritional value at all, and then bringing down that sugar to a very low sugar, no sugar claim, and then adding a functional benefit. That just tremendous growth in those types of products that people can integrate into their everyday routine. And then finally, I have to touch on this trend. I think you mentioned it earlier, Catherine, but this sober curious movement as well fits right into this trend of drinking your health. And again, it's being driven by that younger consumer not wanting to consume as much alcohol, but still be able to indulge in a beverage at a social function. And so at KeHE, we now have a wide assortment of products, whether that's going to be in the non-alcoholic beers, the non-alcoholic wines, mocktails. Many of these are now offering a functionality claim in terms of mood or stress support. So it's just an area with all of these different types of drinks that continue to see tremendous innovation. So I think that's gonna continue as we go into 2025.
And a couple of things that just strike me as I listen to both of you. Number one is, Catherine, I love this idea that you're talking about that, look, innovation doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from organizations that are set up and built to innovate. And that is not something to overlook. Mark, what you're talking about with drinks, I think is so fitting for our sort of collective ideas of what innovation is going to look like in the year or years ahead, which is just, it's not linear. It's so interconnected. So when we think about drinks, when we think about this category, we are looking at an interlock of functional benefits and ingredients and generational trends. And so successful innovation isn't just single-minded. It's not just linear in one direction. It is often a hybrid or a matrix of lots of different things coming together. When we think about that idea of sort of coming together and reshaping what products look like in reality, one of the ways that we've also seen that come forward is in this idea of sustainability, which is what I want to jump to next. It's definitely a flashpoint of interest in lots of conversations, but just more recently starting to come into the area of food, whether it is the actual food product or the packaging. I'll give it to both of you and say, how do you think about sustainability, its value, and its relevance to both brands and retailers?
I think what we really see is sustainability is incredibly important in the minds of consumer, but there are other things that are still often coming first in their buying point. Just the reality of whether it's budgets, whether it's a health component that I'm looking for, how it tastes, obviously also always reigns. That being said, it's becoming increasingly table stakes to make sure that your products are prepared for the future sustainability. And it's going to be really important for our industry to really get under the hood and understand how to make it profitable to have products that are also good for the planet. Because not only are consumers increasingly looking for it, younger consumers, once again, more than ever, are looking for positive planetary impact. And as we get the equation right of flavor and price and health span, all these components right, sustainability can often be the tipping point for a purchase. And Mark, I know you've really been digging into this a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think everyone would agree with the statement that we all want to make better choices for the environment. But as you said, there are other factors when selecting food, beverage, and supplements. It's going to come down to cost, taste, and function. So I think that assuming you have a great product that has real value in it, adding a sustainability aspect to that product can really set it apart from the competition. But yeah, there are two movements: the regenerative agricultural movement, definitely seeing more and more claims and lots of big initiatives that are brought to the market by brands. That looks very strong over the next 7 years. And then also upcycling, and specifically upcycling as it relates to snacks, over 100% growth with making those claims. It's definitely something that we're going to see continue going forward. I think it's going to be an educational piece that we're going to need to work towards and continue to drive towards the consumer so they have a better understanding of sustainability initiatives.
The panelists touch on the role sustainability plays in the natural food industry today. And while it might not be the number one driver behind purchasing, it has become a key consideration for many companies developing new products. Additionally, we've seen increasing demand around regenerative ag and upcycling were references to sustainability trends that are gaining traction. What sustainability angles do you see gaining momentum in the natural food space? What are you hearing from brands and retailers? And I guess, how should companies be thinking about their sustainability goals in 2025?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. And I have a little bit difference in opinion as to how the panel talked about it. So for the longest time, I think consumers have equated food and nutrition, right? I eat an apple, that's better for me. I eat a candy bar, that's not as good for me, right? But if you think about, so what's the environmental footprint of those two items? There's less tying of food to environment or food to sustainability. That's the consumer. What they didn't talk about in the panel was that the manufacturer, the food company, the retailer, those are the ones that understand the impact of sustainability on food because they're looking at their supply chains. And a lot of these retailers and manufacturers are so big and their supply chains are so long that they only need to be missing one thing out of their supply chain. And that means there's a hole in the shelf. And now they're not shipping 99% to their retailers, they're shipping 80 or 70%. And so to me, I think the sustainability piece starts with the retailers and the manufacturers, the large brands, because they're the ones who are going to pay the cost when climate change or weather changes actually cause delays or parts of their supply chain to be wiped out or have to move or have to relocate. So one of the things, as an example, is instead of seeing 100% transition to a quote unquote greener product, you might see some blends. And a great example of that is Atomo. And so what Atomo does is they've upcycled food waste, which is date pits, and the pits are actually a piece of the waste stream. You can't really consume them. And so what they've done is figured out, and they have a number of other ingredients, but as an example, how do you use date pits? How do you upcycle those into a product that actually has many of the molecular characteristics that coffee has? And they figured out how to fine tune on the ones that are the most important for you as a coffee drinker. And then they figured out how to make those in a way, and they can actually sell them to coffee suppliers who, coffee's at a 50-year high right now on pricing. A lot of the growing regions are being impacted. The areas in which you can grow these products is actually shifting and moving. When coffee tree takes several years to get up and going. And so what they do is they mix 50-50 with a Starbucks coffee or whoever, Dunkin', any sort of brand, which they can now dramatically lower the dependence by 50% on the natural product and substitute with a product that has the same characteristics, the same flavor profile. You're still serving real coffee, but you're doing it at a much lower environmental footprint. Where I think the big sort of demand or push is going to be is really from the retailers and the manufacturers of the food, not the consumers necessarily. However, with that said, there is an increasing amount of consumers that are continuing to look at sustainability. And so I think it will continue to increase, but it's not the main driver yet.
And so we're going to move into our final sort of big theme of 2025, which we're calling media of the moment. SPINS recently fielded a survey that you can read about on our blog of top 50 executives in the natural products industry, asking them what they were concerned about, asking them what they were going to be focused on next year. And again, what we heard was this idea that, look, social media, non-traditional channels of sales and customer engagement, that is where people are spending a lot of their time, a lot of their investment. But they're also feeling relatively unprepared for that. So I think Mark at KeHE, Catherine and I at SPINS, we look at some of these numbers and we say, well, this is definitely an area where we want to participate, where we want to help everyone get comfortable, get ready. So I think, KP, I'm going to bump it back to you because you mentioned this idea of how we learn and the side of engagement that comes in education, getting smarter about food. It seems like this is maybe one of the most important roles that channels like social media and direct-to-consumer outlets are playing.
Without a doubt. I think if there's a big call to action to think about as a brand and as a retailer, it's really work to be where your consumer is learning and where they want to engage. I mean, it's just the speed at which we're able to gain information, absorb, and explore. It's just incredible. And if you think about it, we discover a brand and it has our attention for a moment. And how do you capture the purchase at that moment if you're a retailer or a brand? We spend a lot of time with our Destiny customers building shoppable landing pages. So it's like, oh, I want to try that new high protein, low sugar bar. And I can immediately drop it in my cart right there while I'm thinking about it, because in 30 seconds later, I've moved on to the next thing. So that's a really big call out for all the brands today is take these trends, but then think about the fact that you have to engage right where your consumers learn about you. How do you invest in tests using things like retail media or shoppable landing pages? You got to make sure you're measuring the impact. Make sure you've got the right tools and KPIs to measure Make sure you're using influencers properly. Again, incredible ways to build awareness for your brand, because the game is continuing to change. And we know this relationship between brick and mortar and digital experience is very blended as well.
Yeah, and I'll add just one quick thought. I think what you said is the discovery portion. The final trend that we identified is, and we've called it unexpected areas of discovery. So if you look at that consumer, as you said, they're used to a multi-channel type of approach to shopping. And so social media is driving a lot of growth across these trends. Statistics show that 50% of US adults who follow social media influencers are also following food and drink accounts. And food and drink is the second leading category followed on social media, only behind entertainment. So it's really taking the trends that we've talked about today and just putting kind of fuel to the fire to get these trends out more. And then my final point is more on that unexpected side where, yes, we're seeing lots of growth within typical channels. But as we talked about at the beginning, the convenience channel is showing significant growth for these types of products. And then even beyond that, lots of products are now available at these unexpected areas such as airports or your local gym or bookstores, things like that. So there really is more and more opportunities for consumers to be introduced to this. So brands really need to take advantage of that and use that as an opportunity to expand their distribution.
The end of the conversation, they shifted gears a bit and focused on how non-traditional channels of customer engagement, like social media, are becoming increasingly important. The panelists emphasized that companies have to be where your customer is and be ready to engage. I know Once Upon a Farm is a great example of a company that's really capitalizing on the social media opportunity. How are you seeing companies such as Once Upon a Farm or maybe other companies you work with taking advantage of new opportunities for consumer engagement and marketing?
Yeah, I think that the ability for any one person now to be able to amass an audience, and it's not necessarily the best sometimes, it's sometimes just the people who do it the most, right? And you get these micro influencers that can get 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or even 100,000 followers. And so anyone can now start to build these social media brands, and food is one of the top two things talked about on social media. One of our brands, Once Upon a Farm, has one of the co-founders is Jennifer Garner, and she is able to use that platform, the social media platform that she's got, to really talk about a lot of the things that you don't get a lot of time to talk about on a commercial. She's got some of those Capital One commercials out there, and those are really a 30-second to talk about the brand. But when she goes on social media, she can actually get into nutrition and where to find it and the benefits for you and all those different things that really social media is giving these longer form. Obviously, if it's not interesting, people are gone, but it does give people much more touches out there. And there's a lot happening there that I think that will continue to drive a lot of short-term fads. And I think you'll see a lot of it drive some longer-term trends too.
I'm looking at the questions that have come in. And one of the questions I see, which we get almost every time we do a discussion like this is great, but what do I do next? Like, what do we do to evaluate new brands and whether or not they're going to succeed if we are a retailer? Or from the SPINS perspective, what criteria would we say makes for successful innovation? So maybe we'll end on that big question because it is practical and it is pragmatic.
Yeah, it's a great question. I hear this question all the time. So as you think about a new line extension or potentially launching and scaling a new product, I think about it from a product standpoint and then from a people standpoint. So first and foremost, the product, it has to taste great. We've talked a lot about trends today, but you have to have something that tastes very good. Second, I would say, is the innovation piece. How do you differentiate your product out there? How can you present to a buyer something that is distinct and different that can add incrementality to a particular set? So that might come from ingredients, it might come from function, but really trying to differentiate yourself. Packaging also is hugely important. It has to stand out on shelf. If you're making some sort of claim on package, do you have the right certifications that are certifying that product? Because that's going to add more value to it. And then, so that's all the product side. And then I would say the people side, is this company being led by a passionate founder or group of founders? Have they built the right team around them to make this venture successful? And then finally, I would just say all of that Do you have a story that you can take to the market? You can have a great product that tastes great with a good team, but can you really execute that story side of it?
That was a fantastic list. I think probably maybe one thing I'll add that I've heard from a few retailers is, it's a bonus if you happen to have already built a tribe through some of your early trial and error, whether it's a direct-to-consumer brand that you've been tinkering with the formula. And so there's nothing a retailer loves more than when you say, hey, I just got into X retailer, and your fans start screaming. They're excited because now they can buy your brands in a store. So if you have that opportunity in your test and learn phase of your creation to start building that tribe, put you a step ahead, because you're already going to have a following once you actually hit the retail shelves to start picking it off the shelf.
Well, listen, I want to thank Mark and Catherine for joining us today. I want to thank everyone who stayed on. Again, I know
Chuck, this is our last episode as we close out the year and think about coming back in 2025. Any thoughts on what the new year will bring for the natural foods industry?
One of the things that I think we'll continue to see next year is the recovery of plant-based protein. And I think that there was a challenge with some of the flavor profiles and the cost structure and the performance. I think the industry will continue to get better at that. Now we've got this opportunity to continue to bring in innovation. And to me, there's nothing better for an entrepreneur than constraints. And you give an entrepreneur constraints and they figure their ways around it. So that's where I just think there's a lot of passionate people. Many of them are trying things that may or may not work, but that's how you get real innovation in this space. And, super excited by the opportunity ahead.
And that's a wrap for season 1 of the S2G podcast. We have some really exciting things planned for season 2, so stay tuned for that in the new year. And from all of us at S2G, happy holidays. We look forward to many more of these insightful and paradigm-shifting discussions, and to continue to bring more people and perspectives into the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.